Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Pedalshift. On this edition, we go all the way back to November 30th, 2017 for Pedalshift project number 099, the very final episode with the leading zeros. It was kind of a thing. For an episode on bicycle touring food. I mean, let's be honest, this show is really effectively just a show about eating when all is said and done. Eating and complaining about sun exposure. But on this episode, and this true best of, we talk a little bit about eating strategies while you're on tour. And it's a little more complicated than you may think sometimes. And sometimes it's really simple. Hope you enjoy. On this episode of the podcast, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We'll be re-entering the lab, and the lab is the part of the show where we talk about experiments and other things that sort of help make your bike tour a little bit better. And I don't know, this sort of doesn't neatly fit into the lab. It doesn't neatly fit into a journal, although there's stuff from past bike tours that this is relevant to. So I'm just going to call this as part of the lab because there is a lot of experimental stuff that goes into this, and that is eating on bike tour. I know that for so many of you, me included, I shouldn't say you, for those of us who enjoy the eating, who enjoy the fact that when we're on a bike, we have caloric needs that can only be met by eating large amounts of food. It's one of the magical parts of bike touring. And so I thought I would spend an extended amount of time on this episode, talking a little bit about sort of how I approach it, whether I'm eating quote unquote good or whether I'm eating quote unquote bad, and everything is really subjective. I also know just at the outset that eating is a super personal thing. So one's definition of eating good or eating bad is going to be very different. So I'll start off with a caveat that to each one's own in all of this. There are folks who are, like me, not so into the sugar. There are folks that are vegan. There are folks that are, omnivorous and, will eat whatever they've got. I know that there's some folks, I'm trying to remember specifically who, so I can give them credit, but they refer to themselves as sort of garbage disposals when they go out and they're on tour and they'll eat anything. So, and I certainly probably am in that realm more often than I'd care to admit. But in any event, eating is super personal. There's zero judgments on however you choose to eat when you're on tour. But I thought I'd just talk a little bit about sort of the universe that's out there and some of the ideas on how I approach things when I'm going out on tour. I am by no means perfect on any of this kind of stuff. And, very often I'll be going into something with the greatest of intentions on eating a particular way. And by the middle or end of the tour, it's like, forget it. I'm doing whatever is available, or I'm eating whatever I'm kind of craving in the moment. So we'll talk a little bit about all those types of things. So let's talk about the nature of bike touring and at least my experience with how things go when you're on a tour. As I mentioned before, you often will go into a bike tour with the best of intentions on how you want to eat. And what I have found is, especially on longer ones, things that are a week or more, good intentions tend to go out the window because of the following factors in any given bike tour. Number one is the lack of availability of healthy foods. So if your intention is to eat healthily, then the lack of availability of that food can often be a real barrier. Now, substitute healthy for whatever you want. You may be going in with the intention of, I want to eat whatever I want, but you're still going to have lack of availability for certain types of foods, impacting how you go along. The second thing where good intentions tend to go out the window is your caloric needs go through the roof compared to your just normal existence. And, that never underestimate how that can be. The one thing that I will say, though, is that I've learned in recent years that my caloric needs are never as high as I think they are. When I first got into bike touring, I was, using those calorie calculators. Okay, I'm biking at this speed for this many hours and thinking I'm burning 10 to 12,000 calories in a day. And that may be true, but I think that that's not necessarily always the case. It just sort of depends on your terrain. And remember, a lot of those things are averages. So your actual caloric needs may actually be closer to the 5, 6, 7,000. So if you're sitting there going, I'm going to eat as if I've just burned 10 to 12,000 calories, but you've really only burned 6 or 7, well, you can understand why some people gain weight on tour. Last but not least, in terms of the good intentions going out the window, is shifting palate. And this is something that I've noticed for myself, and I'm curious if anybody else has noticed this with your own bike tours. But I find that my desires change in the middle of a tour. And sometimes it's because I'm eating a lot of one thing that I thought I would really like. And by the end of that tour, I am just dead tired, sick of it. I talked with Daniel on the last ride down the Pacific coast there, and he was really done with Cliff Bars. And I'm totally in the same boat. I just can't look at a Cliff Bar the same way I used to. I remember the first time I had a Cliff Bar. I was hiking up, those of you in the Portland area know this place. It's on the Washington side of the Columbia River, Dog Mountain. It's a pretty popular day hike. And I was utterly unprepared for it. You know, when our new friends said, hey, let's go for a hike, I was imagining the types of hikes that I was having in Western New York, which generally are relatively flat. They may be long, but they're relatively flat. Now, this thing was up a damn mountain, and I was utterly unprepared for it. I didn't have enough water. I brought no food, nothing. And the guy that we were hiking with hands me a Cliff Bar, and I'd never had one before. And it was the most delicious thing I think I had ever had in my entire life in that moment. Fast forward a few years, a few decades even, and I am really not as into them as I used to be, at least on that one day. So, you know, shifting palate. On bike tours, the only thing that I've never gotten sick of are Snickers bars, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, your taste for things, I have found, will sometimes change. So when I'll use another example. I used to be really into making basically macaroni and cheese, and then a packet of tuna and maybe a little extra cheese in it, or maybe some peas or something else to go into that. And I made that a lot because it was easy. It was very hearty. It had a lot of calories in it. It was really filling. It was nice, a warm meal, especially on cooler nights. But I got to the point where sometimes you make it and you don't make it quite as good. Maybe the macaroni doesn't get done all the way through. By the way, you Canadian folks, I'm talking about craft dinner, just to translate there. Yeah, and now I don't make that anymore because it just doesn't appeal to me. And it might be A, I overdid it. B, my tastes have changed. I've moved away from that kind of stuff. But it happened literally in the middle of a bike tour when I had another meal or two of it, and I was like, I don't want to make this anymore. And I used to make it every night, or make it a lot. And I did. It was a staple of tours for me. And maybe it might be a good one for you too. It's simple. It's easy. We'll talk a little bit about some food prep and some ideas for you in a few minutes as well. And that was certainly one of them, but I can't do it anymore because of my shifting palate. So, you know, what you need to do is you need to go into the whole concept of a bike tour and what you want to eat, being mindful of the fact that you're probably going to be tired. What kind of availability is there, whether you want to cook or not, because I know a lot of folks out there who are more into bike packing don't carry stoves. And we talked about that on a past show, you know, about the best stove for you may be no stove at all. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the various different types of approaches to eating while you're on tour. And I'm going to start off with those of you who like to tour without cooking at all. Now, I've done that. There are times when I lean more towards that, especially on shorter tours or under circumstances where I know I'm going to be going by restaurants or places to pick up food, and I just don't want to deal with carrying the stove or cooking or anything like that. Now, the other consequence of that is when I don't bring the stove is I don't get to have coffee in the morning, and I'm here to tell you that I'm usually much better with my coffee, but I've talked about how I've used caffeine pills as a substitute to that, and that works out pretty well. So if you're touring without cooking and you're worried about the whole coffee situation, consider the caffeine pills, especially if you just need that little bit of caffeine in the morning like me to get yourself rolling. The first thing that I would say if you're going to be touring without cooking is carry snacks that you like, but try to be diverse. I have found when I do a ride like that, where I'm not going to be cooking, I like to have a variety of different things. So I'm not always getting, oh, wow, look, almonds. Oh, look, just the same thing every single time. Oh, it's just jerky. Okay. So what I like to do are things like trail mix. Trail mix is kind of nice because it can be a relatively good calorie bang for the buck, but it's got a variety of different textures and flavors and things like that. So that's one way to do it, is to do kind of a diverse mix as it is, or otherwise just carry a variety of different things, nuts, cheese, if you're into meat, if you're into dairy, all those different types of things. I think that when it comes to the handlebar bag snack, nuts are probably your best bang for the buck in terms of calories to weight and bulk. They've got a little bit of fiber in them. They've clearly got a good amount of calories in it. It's got some good fats. It's got a little bit of carbs. It's a good thing to have in your system. And they're one of my favorites. They're kind of my go-tos no matter what I'm carrying. I would say that maybe jerky is your next one up from there. And that's only because that, again, you're going to be getting some more oomph in there, technical term. And if you don't eat meat, they actually do make jerkies that are non-animal based, which I've tried and are reasonably okay, but they're pretty expensive, as all jerkies are. I've talked about on the show before on how to make your own jerky using a dehydrator or even using your own toaster oven. I'll put some links in the show notes to some past episodes of that. I've had some pretty good success with that. I've been eating a lot less meat lately, so I haven't been doing it. But when I have, I found that I really like it. And of course, it's a much more cost-friendly way to do it. You can also control the types of ingredients that are going in it as well. Source your meat a little bit differently than maybe just the rando Walmart meat that you're getting. So that's another possibility for you there. I would say that sugary things are always high calorie to weight ratio, but as I've talked about in the past episodes of the show, what I've been doing lately, be mindful of how your body burns sugar. On this last tour, I allowed myself to eat sugar, but only when I was literally hopping on the bike and moving, because I know how my body reacts to it. And I've read, as I've talked about ad nauseum on the show, a whole bunch of different books that suggest that sugar is really terrible for you. I don't know if this is a fad kind of a thing or not, but the science seems kind of compelling to me. So that's another thing to be mindful of. I know a lot of folks really like, things like goos and gels and candy bars and all sorts of different things. And, if that is the type of thing that gives you the energy to keep rolling, awesome, go for it. For me, I am trying to get away from that as much as I can. I noticed that I talked about the palate shift. I noticed that my whole relationship with food changes when I'm eating sugar versus not. And we just got through the Thanksgiving holiday here in the States. And you know what? I love me some pumpkin pie. And I had myself a little pumpkin pie, some cranberry sauce. And I noticed not only did I gain a few lbs during the holiday weekend, but I also just didn't feel the same and I didn't feel right. So pay attention to how you feel when you eat certain foods, and you may find that you change your overall dynamic when you're eating on tour or maybe even when you're eating at home. I think so often we ignore food as a predecessor or precursor of things that happen in our bodies. And I'm not talking about, food necessarily making you sick, although it certainly can. Just how does your body react to it? And just pay attention to it. I know a lot of people use food journals and pay attention to how they feel and what their energy levels are like. So that's something to pay attention to when you go bike touring as well. That might inform how you pack for food going on in the future. So anyways, those are some ideas on if you're touring without cooking, what types of snacks you're going to carry with you, because obviously you're not going to have a stove. If you're touring without cooking, you're probably, but not always, going to be touring in places where you've got access to a lot of grocery stores, if not restaurants. Now, obviously restaurants, they prepare the food for you. You stop in, you charge up your phone, you eat, go for it. But if you are hitting the grocery store, and this of course would be true if you're cooking as well, and we'll get to cooking stuff in a little bit. But I've got some strategies on how to handle going to grocery stores when you're on bike tour. I know that this can be a stress point for a lot of folks when they're on tour because they're worried about their bikes and, oh, what's going to happen when I go inside? Are people going to root through my panniers and all that other kind of stuff? I mean, I will say that when I've gone, I would say in larger cities, you've always got to be mindful of leaving your stuff unattended. In some of the smaller cities, and I'll use the examples of some of the trail towns on the C&O and the Gap, and some of the smaller towns on the Pacific Coast route. I've never had a problem. I've never heard of anybody having a problem. But that said, I always lock up. I just think it's taking too much into your own hands and putting too much trust in the goodness of humanity, which these days I'm not so sure I'm into. I lock my bike up. I don't worry about my panniers. Frankly, I think most people look at them and are utterly befuddled on how to open them up even. So yeah, I've never had an issue with it. I do carry in my wallet, my phone, and any true valuables. Those come in with me usually in my handlebar bag. So anyways, I know that doesn't have anything to do with eating, but we're talking about grocery store strategies here. So if you're rolling through a town and there's a store close to where you camp, this is sort of the best deal for you, especially if it's a grocery store that, like so many in the States, have a lot of pre-prepared foods and things like that. You can get really good bang for your buck value at a place like that compared to going to a restaurant or a cafe or something like that. So what I generally tend to do is I focus when I'm at a grocery store on the things that are hard to get or otherwise would require advanced prep or prep that I just can't do in a camp. So I focus a lot on fresh vegetables, salad mixes, pre-prepared, pre-bagged with the dressing and stuff all in there. Man, those are fantastic. I'll eat a whole one as part of my dinner. And that's a real go-to for me when I'm going through a town with a grocery store. I'll use an example. Honeyman State Park in Oregon is right on the other side of Florence. It's Florence. I knew it would take me a second to get there. But in Florence, there's a great big Fred Meyer there. And Fred Meyer is a kind of a good local chain in the Northwest, particularly in Oregon. And so I always end up going there. And on this trip, I got a bag salad. I got an avocado. I basically did the type of things and ate the way that I would eat at home. Now, the salad dressing was probably full of sugar and junk, but at the very least, I was eating more closely to what I would do when I wasn't on a bike. I just ate substantially more. The other thing that you can get when you're close to camp, like in that situation, I think it was maybe 2 miles away, at most maybe 3 from camp. You can get things that are either very hot or very cold or prepared foods or things like that you normally wouldn't be able to store in your bag all day. So if you want to end your day with a pint of ice cream, dude, go for it. I've done that before back in the old days when I ate more sugar. But also you've got things like hot prepared foods. Sometimes they'll have like a hot bar or something like that. That might be the type of thing that can fuel your dinner for the night. And then you don't have to worry about cooking if you're not into cooking. But otherwise, you might be able to get something that maybe you don't get to get very often. I know at a lot of these places, they'll have like a Chinese food bar or a hot wing bar or something like that. And you can pick and choose what you want. If you lean more towards veg or vegan, you can usually do a lot better at places like that. So my strategies tend to be focus on the foods that I can't get or won't keep, in addition to getting foods that I need to be able to get to make sure that I've got meals down the road later if I'm not going to have access to grocery stores. And we'll talk about that in a second here. In fact, we'll talk about it right now. I always like to have at least one meal on me that is for the future. So let's say that I've got a section of the ride where it's like, okay, well, I'll get lunch in this town, but I know I won't have an opportunity to do any shopping for dinner. So I want to make sure I have a dinner. I usually make sure I have an extra, very light, very easy to deal with meal with me at all times that isn't necessarily spoken for, whether for a breakfast, lunch, or dinner. So whether you cook or not, you should have something on you that serves as a meal of some kind, just in case your plans change or you don't make it to your planned endpoints that presumably has food. Like, for instance, the Honeyman State Park example, where you just know you're going to be going through Florence and you know you're going to have access to food. Let's say you don't make it all the way there and you're camping at some other place, or you're stopped someplace and you need to have a meal and you don't have access to the food. This extra meal, having a meal on you, I think I'll call it an emergency meal. I think it's the right way to go. So for you non-cookers, examples, tortillas and peanut butter. I know, breakfast of champions, right? But that's something that's super easy, got nice calories to it. Lots of people like peanut butter. I might be American-centric there. If you're European, you may not. Use Nutella, use something else. Tuna packets. It used to be that you had tuna only in cans. Now they make them in foil packets, which works so much better. It's a lot lighter. The aforementioned Cliff Bars, or any kind of protein or power bars out there, they make them in vegan style as well. So if you're vegan or veg, you've got opportunities there as well. So non-cookers, bring something that's hearty that you can substitute as a meal replacement. That was redundant, so that you can substitute as a meal for you. For you cookers, when you're in the grocery store, think about things that are going to be lightweight, but if you ate it, it could serve as a meal replacement. Dehydrated potatoes. They make these. There's a couple of different brands here in the States, but basically it's just a small packet. Sometimes they're as cheap as like $1 or $1.50. And you add hot water to it, and it is more mashed potatoes than you can shake a stick at. It will serve as a full meal if you need it. Just one of those packets, just tucked in the bottom of your pannier, can be a helpful thing. Now, maybe you're going to plan on using it for a meal, like I'm going to be talking about in my campsite meal ideas in a moment here. But I think that it's also good to have something like that there just as a backup, just in case. You never know. Bike could break down, all sorts of things. Plans change and you're like, I'm at a campsite and I didn't end up going to the place where I thought I'd get food. Or, you know what, I'm in the campsite and the place that I was going to go to is a mile away and I just don't feel like it. I'm just going to make what I got on me. Dehydrated potatoes if you're a cooker. Those pasta or rice packets. Here in the States, we've got a brand called Knorr. I think I've talked about this on the show. Knorr, Knorr. They are green packets. They're usually next to spices and the pasta section and the bean section. Man, they're usually $1 a piece. Sometimes they're on sale for even less than that. And while I would say one of them is often just shy of a meal, it's at least there for you. And maybe you make it as a side. I think Canadians, you guys call it sidekicks. That you could do that for another meal, or maybe it ends up being a replacement for something else as well. They're really cheap, inexpensive. Those are great things as a backup if you're a cooker, those types of things. Either way, whether you're a cooker or a non-cooker, it's a little bit on the heavier side, but a canned soup or canned pasta, if you don't cook and you're in a pinch, man, pop that thing open and just eat it straight from the can cold. I know that's not the greatest thing in the world, but it's there if you need it. And likewise, if you're a cooker, just heat it right on up. So that's kind of part of my grocery store strategies is focus on the good stuff, focus on stuff you can't get for your immediate meals. Make sure you've got stuff for the next few nights or days or whatever your needs are, and always make sure you've got an extra backup in there as well. What I didn't talk about, and probably is something that more people are more interested in, is some meal ideas when you're at camp. Now, if you're not a camper, and you're staying at B&Bs or hotels, or you're staying in towns, obviously this stuff is not as important to you. I think all of the other stuff has the possibility of being relevant and useful to you. But for you campers, this is the stuff that can be really helpful. And I've got 3 ideas here for easy campsite meals that I have in more recent tours really started to enjoy. Now, I talked about my the cheesy mac with tuna. I think that's a go-to that's been done by a lot of folks. You've got, Franks and beans and kind of the real classic American camping food and stuff like that. Let me go through a few things that I've gotten into recently. Canadian American Thanksgiving. I talked about this on the last tour, and I'll tell you, it was a lot easier than I thought it would be to create a meal that was frankly really good. Now, I just got through American Thanksgiving and did a nice little, I did roasted vegetables and a whole bunch of other things. There's no way you're going to be able to do that quite the same while you're on tour. But let me tell you again what I did on this past tour during Canadian Thanksgiving. This was for 2 people, so having a 2-pot setup is actually probably your best bet because it gives you the most ability. But for the most part, what you're doing is you're going to be heating things up and you're going to be heating water. And those are the only 2 things you're going to be doing. So it's really easy and it's good for cleanup. So you're going to be boiling water and you're going to be doing that to make your mashed potatoes, your instant mashed potatoes. In the other pot, so that's 1 pot, that's easy, just boil water. The other pot, what you're going to do is you can get some canned chicken or canned turkey and mix that up with a gravy packet. And you'll make the gravy first. That usually just takes cold water and a little bit of stirring and a little bit of heat until it starts to thicken up. Those gravy packets are like $1. They're so cheap. They're really inexpensive. Then drain the chicken or the turkey and then put it right into the pot and let it all heat through. Just, you don't have to do a very hot flame. In fact, you really don't want a hot flame on that. You just want to slowly heat that up. Meanwhile, your potatoes, you can put them into a cozy if you've got it, or otherwise just kind of wrap them up. They're done almost instantly, hence the term instant mashed potatoes. But by the time you're done heating everything up, which does not take very long, you dump the gravy and chicken or turkey mix on top of the potatoes on your plate. And if you're really crazy, get a can of cranberry as well and add that on. That is a pretty great meal. It was really filling and really easy to do. Cleanup is a breeze because you only have 1 pot with stuff in it, and it's pretty easy. You basically just put in some water and let that kind of reheat up and then scrub out that pot and you're all set. The other one, of course, only did water. I tend to like to cook mostly when I'm at camp, only boiling water, so I don't have to do a lot of dishes. I'm very lazy. But in this one, it's worth it. And you can also add on other things if you would so choose. You can get canned vegetables if you want, or anything along those lines to add to that. But it's a really fun, easy to do type of meal. The ingredients are very readily available at most grocery stores, or even often you can find some of this stuff in smaller little small town stores as well. So you just never know. And it's simple. And if you've got time you feel like cooking and it's not a lot of effort, you can have a really glorious meal at the end of your day for relatively cheap. And also relatively easy to do. If you've got a campfire, my next idea is something that can be a really great meal that's super easy and super simple. And what I do is I just grab a couple of sweet potatoes and make sure that I've got some foil on me. Now, that's the one real key here. You wrap the sweet potatoes loosely in the foil. After your fire has gone to coals, stick those sweet potatoes in. Depending on the size, oh, by the way, make sure you prick them. Depending on the size of your sweet potato, and this is an example where I would say don't pick the real fat ones, pick maybe skinnier ones because they'll cook a little bit quicker. You don't have to worry about overdoing them, but if you keep them in the coals for about a half hour or so, depending on the size, if they're real small, they may take only about 20 minutes or so. You pull those out, be careful, they're hot. And then you've got these baked sweet potatoes. Then add whatever you would like to it. A lot of people I like to add butter to mine. And you know what? Butter actually keeps pretty well, better than you think, over the course of time in the saddle. It actually does not need to be refrigerated in most circumstances, especially the good butter, the good grass-fed butters that are out there. Add nuts, add walnuts, bring along a little a little container of a pumpkin pie spice. I like that stuff on my sweet potatoes. A little salt, a little pepper, whatever you'd like. That is a really, really filling meal, and it's very simple, especially if, again, you know you're going to be doing a fire. Maybe you're not going to want to eat right away. Maybe you had a later lunch and you're not hungry right away. This is an awesome thing to do. And man, cleanup's a breeze. You eat it right out of the foil. Super easy to do. The sweet potatoes are indestructible, so you don't have to worry about them bruising in your bag or anything like that. So that works out really well. Third one for a campsite meal idea, and this is really not rocket science here. I just call them cheesy wraps. So get some tortillas or wrap, whatever style you like, whether you like the corn, you like the whole wheat, whatever you like. And what I just do is I will get one of those rice mixes, those Knorr rice mixes, Maybe add some beans to it, open up a can of beans and add those in, add some cheese, get it really nice and goopy, and just put it inside of that wrap it all up and go for it. Bring along some hot sauce, something along those lines. That's a good, really hearty, filling meal, and it is brain dead simple to make. Those are 3 things that I tend to do a fair amount. And sometimes they're even more complicated than I really get into. Sometimes I just get a ramen, you don't need to get super complicated at the end of the day. I don't know about you if you are a cooker, if you do like to prepare a meal at camp. But for me, there are times when I'm just like, I don't want to do a thing. I don't even want to boil water. And so, sometimes I'll be in the middle of a day and I'm stopping for lunch in a town and I know that there's no dinner possibilities after that town. And I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to go to Subway, for instance. Here's an example of something I've done. And I sit down and I get a sub for lunch. And then when I'm done with it, I get up and I get another sub and it just goes into my pannier or into my handlebar bag. And that's going to be my dinner for that night. That's such a simple way to approach things as well. One thing that I would say is that just to sort of wrap up the whole concept of eating while on tour, we often eat things that we're not super proud of. And it's funny what your cravings do when you're on tour. And I've talked about how I tend to jam on the Snickers bars. When I was out on this tour this past October, of course, it was, prep for Halloween time. So every time I was in the grocery stores, there's the Halloween candy everywhere. I would go and I would just get those little mini bags of Snickers bars, the little ones, because those were really great for sort of, I've got a big hill coming up and I need some energy. Pop a few of those in and I'm gone. I ate an inordinate amount of Snickers bars. I really like them for fuel, but I enjoy them a lot too. So I'm not proud of that. I ate a lot. I think I ate 2.5 bags of those things, which is just ridiculous. But it was a couple week long tour. So I gave myself a little slack. The one thing that I do, which is so weird, is I remember when I was biking with Bell's Star, this would have been about this time last year, when I was just slogging away, trying to make the end miles at the end of my day. And I was not bonking, but I was getting close to feeling that. And I was just grabbing anything I had out of my handlebar bag, just mawing on anything to get my energy up. And so I had a little squeeze thing of peanut butter and beef jerky, and that's all I had left. And I just hit that really hard. So beef jerky and peanut butter, not proud of that. Kind of gross, but actually sort of delicious. And as I think of it, I kind of enjoyed it at the time. Not proud of it, but delicious. So that is me talking for a long time about food. If you are hungry by now, like I am, go off and enjoy a nice, good, healthy meal. But, I hope that these are some good ideas for you for your bike touring, your bike packing, your camping experiences. And also maybe for those of you who aren't into preparing meals, this gives you some strategies at the grocery stores and whatnot. Of course, if you've got restaurants and fast food places that are available for you, obviously you can take advantage of that stuff as well. Have a plan. Try to stick to it, but be flexible and be forgiving to yourself about how this all goes for you. Because like I said at the top of this whole segment, your palate changes, your intentions change, all sorts of things change when you're on tour. Your caloric needs, all of that feeds into one thing. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And, if you're noticing you're not feeling well, start thinking about, okay, well, what have I been eating the last few days? And that might give you an answer right there. And maybe some subtle shifts in what you've been eating, to the extent that that's available to you, can help make things better. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.